Oh no. Come on, Apple, what's going on? Today, I'm gonna answer all of the questions that the other reviewers didn't answer about the M1 Ultra Mac Studio. In our previous video, you saw how Vadim and I took apart the Mac Studio, showed off how it comes apart, all the insane components inside, the dual-sided heatsink with those fans, some other findings such as the upgradable and socketed SSDs, a lot of interesting info, but today we want to see just how it performs. I want to look at the thermal performance, the fan speeds, and the noise. Can it thermal throttle if you're doing both CPU and graphics tasks? Just how fast is it in certain situations? And why in the world is the GPU not performing as well as Apple advertised? We're gonna look at the frequencies, we're gonna look at the wattage, and we're gonna talk about things that other people just don't wanna dig into, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, as you guys can see right here, we have the studio display. I'm putting out a video on it tomorrow, seeing if it is worth it and comparing it to LG's Ultrafine 5K, so make sure you guys are subscribed. And of course, you know that we bought 3 Mac Studios, we spent over 17 grand. We're gonna give you guys the best Mac Studio content on the internet. Now, the first thing that I want to check out is the Thunderbolt ports. You know, we have 6 of them, but can you really maximize all of them? So I'm going to go to the system report here. We're going to go down to Thunderbolt and take a look at that right there. We have 6 Thunderbolt buses. In the past, you'd have 2 Thunderbolt ports, just like on the Mac Minis and MacBooks, but it would actually just be one controller. So it has to split the bandwidth. Here, we have 6 dedicated ones. Each one can actually be split into 3 if you want to. This thing is insanely powerful. Now, this model is the one with 64 graphics cores, and along with that, it also has 128 gigabytes of RAM. So this is the big boy. It's not the one that I took apart. Now, if you're curious about that one, yes, I did get it back together. It does work just fine, but just to make sure everything's good, this is the one that hasn't been touched as far as thermals, but we will be comparing this 128 gig to a 64 gig, and that one has 48 graphics cores. I'm personally curious to see, does 64 really matter? What if 48 is almost as fast? That's what we'll be answering in the future. Now, the next thing I wanna do is test out this SSD. All right, look at that, 5,850 and 5,145. Oh, it just reset right there. Nice and quick, actually slower than the MacBooks, but that might just be because these are non-soldered to the motherboard. There's extra delay there, but this is still insanely fast. Now, inside the Mac Studio, we have 2 beefy fans, and we downloaded TG Fan Pro here to see what the fans run at. And it's very interesting that even at idle, even when we're not doing anything, the fans actually spin up above their base 1,100 RPM, as you guys can see. So they're running about 1,300 when they don't need to be. Now, we can actually go ahead and max out this fan and see what the loudest these can go. That's one thing nobody's shown anybody. It's 3,500 RPMs, but how loud is that? Okay, we hit max, it is spinning up. All right, I don't know if you guys can hear that. That is actually pretty dang loud. Let me pull this over here. Okay, there you go. That is moving some air, guys. 3,500 RPM. We know that this system can get pretty dang loud, and I'm gonna see what happens when we actually max out the CPU and GPU. Can it keep it cool enough? Because we have 64 graphics cores and 20 CPU cores. Let's switch that back to system. Bam, now it is silent. And another thing people didn't really show are thermals. Now, a lot of applications out there, they will lie to you. They won't give you the right info, including TG Fan Pro. But we have another program here, iStatistica, that is working correctly. And looks like we're at 29 degrees Celsius right now for our CPU and 30 for the GPU cluster. Also memory down to 17 Celsius for one of the banks. That is insane. Now, a lot of people have ran Geekbench, so we know those scores, but what they haven't done is actually tell you what the CPUs are running at and the load on the CPUs. So let's go ahead and run Geekbench. It's gonna start out with the single core test. Looks like we're peaking at about 16 watts, and bam, the multi-core kicks in, 61.2 watts right there. So the Mac Studio is definitely giving the CPU as much power as it needs for all those 20 cores, literally maybe even more than double than what we get with an M1 Max in a MacBook Pro. And our thermals, look at that. Our hottest CPU core is at 34 degrees. That's set for the hottest core. Some of these are at 29 still. No issues at all. The fans are still just at the lowest temp that they run at. Very impressive. And look at that, peak wattage, 84? 84.36 watts. Okay, so that means that Apple is actually allowing this thing to hit higher when it needs to. Now, overall score, it's amazing, kills the 28 core Mac Pro, but a little bit lower than what I've seen online. I think I've seen 24,000. Single core is not bad as well. Now, a lot of people are complaining about very low metal scores compared to even the Mac Pro, and definitely compared to NVIDIA graphics cards. So I wanna show you guys why this is happening. Not a lot of people are talking about this. In Geekbench 5, for this compute score, it does all of this so dang quickly that the graphics doesn't even have time to properly ramp up. So right now we got a peak of 53 watts. The M1 Max should be able to hit up to 60 at the maximum. This should be able to hit up to 120, at least the way they designed it. And Apple showed off on stage 105, but look at this, it literally only peaked at 53 watts. So Geekbench is not utilizing the full performance of the M1 Ultra. Now, we still almost got a score of 105,000, beating out the Vega 2 in my Mac Pro, and that was a $2,800 graphics card, so that is good, but this is not its true performance. So let's go ahead and close down Geekbench 5, and I will show you what this can actually do and how much power the GPU can use and at what frequencies it runs with 3D Mark's Wildlife Extreme. Let's go ahead and start their unlimited test. We'll also take a look at the temperatures for the graphics. Bam, look at that. We're at 83.45 watts running, and whoa, dang, that was fast. That was really fast. Okay. The M1 Ultra averaged 212 frames per second. That's about 76% better than the M1 Max in the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which my best score was 121. So not double, but it is close to that, 3/4 of the way there. Of course, this was just such a short burst. And what's interesting to me is that the GPU only hit 83.45 watts. I don't know if it only needs that for this or how quick it was or what, but technically, based on the design to get the full performance, we should be running at about 120, and based on Apple's graphs, 105. So what I wanna do now is let's go ahead and just close this down. I'm gonna run the extreme stress test, which is gonna just keep hitting this machine for about 20 minutes. We'll see what kind of power usage we get, how hot the system gets, and the fans, if they even need to ramp up. All right, guys, we are having an issue with the M1 Ultra. Look at the wattage, 55, 60, 44 watts. Why are we not maxing out this GPU? And a lot of times we're not running at 1300 megahertz pegged like we would on an M1 Max. I'm seeing this go down to 1100, 1249, 1253, and our wattage right now 51, 63, 64. Why are we not pushing this harder? We literally just need tougher tests because I can't run this and get it to hit the system all the way. So we're gonna figure out what we can do for that. But let me go ahead and cancel this. Let's go ahead and test out the CPU. We know that Cinebench is going to max this out. Of course, we've already seen some scores for Cinebench, but nobody's talked about the power usage, frequencies, and temperatures. Let's start our 10-minute test, and right away our CPU is going full blast. All right, guys, we are rolling and we're averaging about 57, 58 watts right now on the CPU, peaked at 71.3. So at least we're getting a good proper CPU scaling. Now it should be 60, 61, but it looks like when we're maxing out the CPU completely 100%, not doing shorter bursts, in this case, we are not running consistently at pretty much where we want to be. And if we look at the performance cores, you guys could see that it's running at 3.0 megahertz, not 3.1 or 3.22 like we saw in Geekbench. Those are just the peaks. Apple's not running this chip at 3.2 consistently when they could. Let's look at temperatures. 48 degrees Celsius, guys. An Intel 12th gen would be at like 95 right now if it's just maxing out its performance, getting close to what this does, slightly faster if you got a good cooler. We are literally running at 48, 49 degrees Celsius right now. Let's take a look. All right, we do have some cores that are hotter. It's different this time around, 58 degrees Celsius, guys. That is insanity. We said that when the M1 Mac Mini was running at 70 degrees Celsius for the performance core, 72, 75, that was shocking. Look at this, look at this bad boy, man. 53 degrees Celsius right now on the hottest core. That is incredible. And our fans, look at this, guys. Literally, they don't care. They have not moved from their regular idle range. Actually, slightly lower, is at 1350 before. So literally, you can have the M1 Ultra, the best CPU, you're maxing it out, ready for 3 minutes. It doesn't care. Now, why isn't Apple giving us more performance? Why can't we run this at 3.5? Come on, guys, at least 3.2. That would be nice. Like the M1 will run at 3.2 in the M1 Mac Mini. Apple, they're limiting this chip. That's why we're not getting perfect scaling. Not because there's issues. Literally, it's just Apple. Look at, we have tons of headroom everywhere. They're the ones holding it back. All right, guys, so we're almost done. We have 13 seconds left out of this 10-minute stress test. I have never seen a computer act this way. We're at 55 degrees Celsius. The fans are still at idle. It just does not care. Even my Mac Pro heated up more than this after the stress test. What did Apple do with this cooler? They just went crazy. All right, guys, we got 23,919, slightly lower than what other people are getting. But once again, I'm running multiple different software in the background. This Powermetrics custom program, it's constantly pulling data, so it's using a little bit of CPU power, which is why we're just slightly below. But just about 24,100 or so is what people are getting. That is killer. That has no issues at all. Way better than I expected. I'm gonna run that again, but what I wanna do is, for those of you guys that are worried about fan noise, I've had multiple people actually reach out to me and say, hey, you know, is the M1 Max just a lot quieter because, you know, you have less cores and whatnot? Let's see what happens when we have both now. Obviously, it didn't care before. CPUs right now running at full blast. Let's kick in the GPU as well. All right, that ran and it didn't care at all. All right, we gotta go. That's the Wildlife Unlimited. Okay, that's not the extreme one. No, that is the extreme one. Let's try out GFX Bench instead. Guys, I don't hear anything there at all. Let's look at the temps. 62 for the CPU. What's the graphics at? 51? 50? Jeez Louise, this system does not care, and our fans were still at idle, maxing out the CPU and maxing out the GPU. And we got a score of 484. That's the same exact leak that I saw earlier. Of course, they weren't maxing out the CPU at the same time. This is just insane. Maybe we're gonna have to throw some red footage at it and export in Lightroom in order to get more usage. Now the CPU is impressive, the cooling system is very impressive, but the graphics is where I'm a little bit underwhelmed, especially because it's not using its full potential. So we have the latest version of Blender that was just released. Let's go ahead and go into a system. We're gonna select metal here, perfect. We got the M1 Ultra GPU selected. It may be faster using both, but let's try it out just using the GPU. I'm gonna go over to our cycles engine, GPU compute, bam. Let's render our party tug scene. All right, we are rendering here, and look at this, guys. Our GPU is running at 27 to 30 watts. Here we have 100% usage, 1296 megahertz, maxed out here. This bar goes further though, maybe because it's the M1 Ultra, I don't know, but why are we only using 30 watts of power? This should be up to 120 watt GPU, about 105 based on Apple's charts. This is incredible. The NVIDIA graphics cards fly through this render here. And look, I mean, this bar should be all the way up here if we were using it correctly. The 16-inch M1 Max laptop does this in about 1 minute and 52 seconds compared to 1 minute and 18 for this desktop that costs at least $5,000 if you go for the 64 core option. It's 1 minute 18 here. I don't know, guys. I have to say that's a bit disappointing, and seeing how little power it's using. It has so much more capability. Hopefully this software just needs to have a lot more optimization so that it could be a lot more competitive with the computers on the Windows side. So let's go ahead and just close this down. Now, the main reason we bought a Mac Studio with the M1 Ultra for ourselves to use long term is video editing. We put out 6-7 videos a week, and we have to sit and wait for export time. So if there's anybody that can benefit from having double encoders and decoders, that is us. So let's see how long this 5-minute 4K project takes. Bam, I started the timer right there. All right, guys, we are only using 7 watts of the graphics. For the CPU, we are at, what is this over here? I can't even find it anymore. It's way too late, it's been a long day. And 13% of the CPU, 35% of the GPU here. Of course, we have those dedicated decoders and encoders. And bam. Oh no. Why is this? Come on, Apple, what's going on? 1 minute and 17 seconds. The M1 Max 16-inch MacBook Pro does this in 1 minute and 22 seconds. Now, I can only think of 2 things. One, some of the tests we've seen online and some of the bad results, that's just what it is. We don't have good scaling with the M1 Ultra, at least what Apple wants you to think you're gonna get. Or 2, we need some software updates. Now, when the M1 MacBooks came out, we had an update right away that actually increased the clock speeds and got a better performance. And when these MacBooks came out, we shortly right after got an update as well that helped. And here we have no updates whatsoever. We're at 12.3. The only update I'm seeing is just for this display to fix some bugs with it. And with that as well, if you take a look at Final Cut, we're running version 10.6.1. I went to the App Store to see if there's an update. No, that is the latest version, which was released 4 months ago. And to make matters worse, if we look at Apple's little fine print here where they gave us all the nice sounding numbers, how fast it was, they were testing using the pre-release Final Cut 10.6.2. Apple, why is that not released when this machine has been released? You know, the testers have had it for a week. We just got it in. In the past, you'd always get the updates right away to make sure you're getting proper performance, but no. And now this Mac Studio, at least for this test, is barely faster than this MacBook Pro, which costs half the price with the battery, the keyboard, the trackpad, the display. My goodness. Okay, well, maybe it'll still perform great with tougher tests. You're gonna throw a lot tougher tests. We will have to test that out. I'm excited to see how the 48 core version performs. That one is $1,800 less than this configuration right here. And the M1 Max for $2,000. Compared to this laptop, it might perform better at a really good price. So I'm very excited for our upcoming videos. Make sure you guys click that circle above to subscribe so you don't miss it out. Check out our teardown if you haven't seen it yet, or just the other video there. And we will have a comparison of this Studio display compared to LG's Ultrafine if it's worth it, guys. Super excited for all the videos we have coming out. Make sure you guys won't miss out on those. This has been Max, and I'll see you in the next video.